Okay, thanks for the cable. So we can now get started. In our talk now, which is called Rebellious Communication, it is about a situation where media and government cause information blackout. And if that happens, it is up for internet activists and rebels to provide the news for the people. Our speaker today will provide his first-hand experience regarding this situation in post-Katrina New Orleans and the Gulf Coast. Please welcome Bicycle Mark.
I had a New Orleans-style jazz brass band because I need that kind of atmosphere to get me going. Good evening, everyone. Clearly, I'm not talking about packets or anything as sexy as all your favorite topics at the CCC. But I'm glad to see that you came because I think part of this event is not only having fun and learning about toys and, well, what I consider toys, maybe you consider tools. It's also about the world around us and how it works, and taking a closer look perhaps behind how it works, right? Because we want to make a better world. That's what I want to do. My name is, on the internet, I'm known as Bicycle Mark. People call me that in real life too. It's perhaps a strange name for someone who considers himself a journalist, but I'm quite used to it. I do a podcast now called citizenreporter.org. Formerly, or many people still know it as Bicycle Mark's Communique or Bicycle Mark's podcast. Whatever you call it, doesn't matter. It's about what I do that I find is more important, and that is reporting on issues that aren't on the front page of your major media, and that I believe belong there. And the I is where the podcasting comes in, of course, because I believe blogging, podcasting, video blogging, it starts from the individual. It could be a group of individuals, but it starts from the individual. And I had this experience, and I'm here to talk about it, but I'm not only going to talk about my experience, I'm also going to talk about what other people are doing, because there are people that are far more important than I am. I was just one of those people who drops in, looks around, enjoys the food, meets people, and then leaves, and now I'm here. There are people who live this situation every day, and they're far more important, and I'm going to talk about them as well. I know in the past I've probably joked around a lot, but this is one of these things that I don't think is funny. So I'm trying to remember not to have too much fun with this. So you're all going to be very sad when you leave here, but perhaps you'll be angry, which is something that I think is also important, to be angry. Let's see how it goes. I titled it Rebellious Communication and the Federal Flood. There's two parts to that. There's the rebellious communication, and there's the federal flood. First of all, rebellious communication. As I said, all those things I said about blogging, a rebellious communicator to me is someone who doesn't adhere to the status quo. The status quo is what the mainstream believes, what you see in the lowest common denominator of society. So in the case of Katrina, or what we should say is New Orleans, today, there is a status quo belief in the United States that they're rebuilding. It's not easy, it's not going well, there's some crazy people down there, but they're rebuilding. So, and we sent some money. Everybody believes the American government, sent some money. And if you accept the status quo, then you believe this is true. And it sounds good. So you would want to believe that your government was helping, sending money, doing their job, repairing. The problem is, first of all, a lot of that isn't true. And that is why I say a rebellious communicator doesn't just accept the story the way it is. You look behind it. My other criteria, of course, is that you don't work for a traditional channel. I was just talking to a friend of mine. She's in Sierra Leone, and she's very interested in what happened and what's happening in New Orleans. And it's funny because she's in Sierra Leone. I'm interested in what's happening in Sierra Leone. But the two actually have a lot in common. Corruption, overall. Blatant corruption. And when I say people who don't work for traditional channels, I'm talking about a group of individuals, including myself to some extent, I don't work for any large media. I am my own media. And we all know about blogging. Probably half of us are bloggers or were. And it's all about not having to work for anybody larger. So that's one of my criteria for rebellious communicators. There's also, you have to openly have a stake in what happens. That's an expression. Have a stake in something means basically your future is involved. The same is true in alternative news. The difference between a journalist who works for a large organization and goes to New Orleans and does some stories, and a person who lives there, who reports about his neighborhood, and depending on what happens in the future, he could lose, or she could lose his or her home. So you have a stake in it. Your future hangs in the balance of what you do. And likewise, you might not only just report, you might actually go and do and put yourself in a situation. So a simple example, I'll come back to it later, the bloggers of New Orleans have physically gone out as a group of bloggers and rebuilt houses. I mean, that's the style of rebellious communicators I'm talking about. I just wanted to explain these little points of the type of person I'm talking about. Now, I don't qualify as all of these. I feel myself here today as more the storyteller. I'm here to tell you a series of stories. Some of them are my own, and some of them are other people's. And we'll just go from there. So I've talked about, I'm going to talk about some bloggers. I myself am a blogger, I'm a podcaster, I'm a video blogger. It's all part of being your own media. It's just whatever your preference is. The other type of person that you have involved in this situation is activists, of course. It's people who care about what happens, who are working perhaps as relief workers to rebuild the city. That includes people who came from outside, like me, who just went to New Orleans and decided this was important. That's basically what happened to me. I decided it was important from day one after the storm. And of course, independent experts. I mean, the beauty of the internet, just like we have a lot of independent experts in here in certain areas, we can have bloggers. We have, for example, engineers. Engineers are very important in this whole discussion of what happened to the city and what's happening to the city. Because engineers are what, among other people, government of course involved, but they were part of the equation in building levees, right? So we have independent engineers who don't work for the government, who blog, who watch, who report, who do their own research. Yeah, it's not their full-time job, but they do it with a passion because they're concerned about their city, or they're just concerned as humans. Probably the same reason you guys are in here right now. They're concerned as humans. I do want to mention, the title also says Rebellious Communications and Federal Flood. I want to talk about the federal flood part in a moment. A couple of factors that we probably already know, but I want to make sure are laid down. The reason that bloggers, and I want to separate the bloggers in New Orleans, or the bloggers about New Orleans, from other bloggers. Plenty of cities have bloggers, right? And there's all kinds of topics. But New Orleans is different because in terms of priorities, there's one very serious priority going on. And that is, will we have a city in the future? Or is this all going to be gone? And this is actually a question that still lingers. Are we going to have a city? Because it hasn't been decided. Or at least the people with the power to make it so, they haven't shown that it's going to happen. And I'll show you some evidence of exactly what I'm talking about. It's important to note that the internet has, of course, been an important medium throughout. Even on the days of the storm, we had people, I think Jacob is around here somewhere, I know he did a lot of things during that time. People were publishing what was going on outside their window as waters were rising, as things were just going bad. And of course, immediately after, you had citywide Wi-Fi, which made a big difference for people to be able to publish, especially when utilities were very irregular, and they still are in New Orleans. Well, now they're irregularly priced. So this is important. I want to mention this. These are factors that helped the people do what they do, the bloggers do what they do. And like I mentioned, there are people with direct experience in all this. There were people blogging about their neighborhood, how the lights haven't gone back on, or the street light doesn't work. These are very simple things, but this is how it begins. And then there are people who happen to work in the city municipal building, And they report about things they hear in the hallway. Now, they don't report under their own name. You know, they're the bicycle marks of the world, although it's not a very secretive name, but there are more secretive names that they go under. And they can report about perhaps things going on in the workplace that they know affect things that are happening in the city, why the things are happening. And of course, the last ingredient, I mentioned anger. The great part about a good New Orleans blogger, although it's not always necessary, but is anger. People are angry about what's happening because it doesn't have to be this way, right? And I'll get more into that in a second. I use the term federal flood. This was something I learned. I didn't know this. I went to New Orleans and I said, oh, so this is Katrina recovery. Hurricane Katrina almost destroyed us, and now we're repairing it. And they said, no, we don't call it Hurricane Katrina. We call it the federal flood. Because it's a flood that was made possible by the federal government. One of the tuba players from the Hot 8 brass band, a very simple quote that says it all. He said, if they knew it could happen, and he's such a calm guy, he says, if they knew it could happen and they didn't do something about it, then it's almost like they let it happen. And then he's really just confused. Who would let this happen? But of course, as people who look behind the information, we could ask who benefits from what's happening. And that's something I keep in mind when I read and learn about all this, and I think you would too. So it wasn't the water alone that destroyed the city. It was poor planning, almost to the point of you wonder why it was so poorly planned. When they knew that this could happen, when they knew what could happen to the city if a storm that would hit eventually would occur. And that's part of the reason we call it the federal flood. There was no investment or attention, or not sufficient attention given to the levees, to global warming, or to the plan of where will people go and how will people come back, which we still don't know how people will come back. More on that in a moment. I call it the brutally negligent and disingenuous relief plans starting the day after the storm until today. I mean, I'll just let that statement stand and I'll move forward. I want to go over just these 4 areas, and out of all of them, the only one I didn't visit actually was a hospital. I did not set foot in a hospital. I don't know if I was fear or simply I was pretty busy. But my experience and what I've been reading extensively through the power of New Orleans bloggers and vloggers is issues of housing and property, issues of prisons, issues of schools and hospitals, and infrastructure. And I'll just go right into them. Because each of these areas are in major crisis and are not getting a whole lot of reporting, especially on a national scene. But even on the local scene, a journalist is overwhelmed in that city because there's so much going wrong. So what's going wrong? A lot of people are asking, there and here, why haven't people gone home? So I rented a car, and I drove the streets like any good tourist in the lower 9th Ward, in the 9th Ward, in Orleans Parish, all over. And the one thing I saw was that there were no people. I drove this, I snapped these shots, and I kept expecting people to, well, not wave. I didn't think they would wave. I thought they would just give me dirty looks for being a tourist. And there were no people. Homes, the doors were, if they weren't boarded up, more often they were just simply open. Windows were open. And it wasn't because it was a beautiful day. It was because there was nothing in the house anymore, or at least nothing of value. Occasionally I would see someone pushing a little cart, collecting spare things from somebody's house and just moving along. People have not come home. And so people ask, why haven't people come home? Remember that when they finally got things going, the city government, with support of state government, sent people away. They sent them to places where they could stay temporarily. So Houston was a popular one, but not only. Baton Rouge in the north. But people were sent as far as California, and I met someone who insists he has relatives that got taken to Alaska. And he was not happy about it because that family is now struggling with the idea of just paying for the plane ticket back to New Orleans. It's a bit ironic, you get a one-way ticket, and they say, look, when everything is better, come on home, fix up your house, never mind the money, find the money, and but yet you have to even pay for the ticket just to come back, and even that is difficult. So people aren't coming home for one reason, because it is a cost. I talked about the distance, but there's also, once you get home, the houses that are there, and there are plenty of houses, some of them are no longer where they used to be, they're across the street. Yeah? I mean, that was the weirdest thing. You know, you would occasionally meet someone, and you'd say, is this your house? And they'll say, well, yes, but that's my address. My house is over here across the street. And these houses need to be destroyed and then rebuilt. So those are two very big costs, right? And then the question becomes, well, where do you get money to do this? Now, what a lot of people are doing, including the very bloggers who are writing about the experience, they took their life savings, the money we saved for maybe our children, for maybe an emergency, I guess, whatever you were saving it for, this is now what you were saving it for, because they take their life savings and they rebuild the house. After that, no more life savings, but you have a house. That's the best they can do right now. But most people, remember that New Orleans has an extremely large, they were the majority, not anymore, poor black community, or middle-class black community as well. It was actually the largest home-owning black population in the United States. Largest home-owning black population in the United States. The most amount of, yeah. And that's something to really admire, in fact. I had the pleasure of meeting lots of people from what are known as black universities, Howard, for example. I met lots of people from Howard, and they said, I've never been here before, but I came down here because in my family, we talk about New Orleans like it's part of us. You know, it's the music we love, it's our heritage. So I came down because I got to do something. But I'll get to those people in a moment as well, the people who come to help. So people aren't coming home. They don't have the life savings. There were no life savings. You survived from check to check, paycheck to paycheck. Now, you're not even getting that paycheck. Maybe you got a new job in Houston, but your check goes towards paying for your house in Houston, your apartment, and you still have your house that's been moved across the street by the storm in New Orleans, but you're not really sure how you're going to fix it. So you don't. Not now. You wait. One, house insurance, right? A lot of people did have house insurance. That covers, as far as I know, and I'm not an insurance expert, but I've learned from them, it covers fire, it covers some theft, and it covers a couple of little other issues that could happen to your house. In most of New Orleans, it does not cover, especially in the poorer sections, it doesn't cover floods, because that's not a flood zone. And who decides on zones? Government. So you can't get insurance money. They're trying. They just lost a big court case last week that said, sorry, your insurance doesn't cover that water that rose, so no money from insurance. And the judge even said something like, it would be an incredible cost to the insurance company, so we couldn't possibly have this. Because, you know, the insurance company is, man, they just barely get by, you know. And sarcasm is risky in foreign territories. You know, insurance companies are doing very, very well, right? They are. But part of the art of being an insurance company is insisting that you're not doing that well. You could have made a bunch of millions more that you didn't get to make. So they don't get the insurance money. There's only one other place you can look, unless you find money or win the lottery or steal. There's only one other place they're looking right now, and they're not getting it from there either, and that's the federal government, the Congress. You know, the people that have a whole lot of money to wage war or to throw a big-ass party for other countries to come and have a conference, country presidents to come and have a G8 or whatever. Well, they don't pay for that, but anyway. They look to the federal government to help. I mean, this is the situation. Even if you don't like government, like a lot of people in the United States didn't used to like, when you're in big, big trouble and something like this, let's say it was the storm, but really it was the federal flood, you look to the government to provide aid. And the government said, we're going to provide aid. And they invented this thing called the road home that is the exact opposite of a road home. It was supposed to be money for everybody to come home. But it got tied up, it didn't get passed, it didn't happen. And then a couple of months ago, they wrote one of these brilliant bills in the United States Congress. It said, among other things, the following billions of dollars, and I cannot keep track of how many billions they're spending, are going to Iraq. On the same document, it said the minimum wage is going to go up, which is pretty cool. And then further down, among other things, there was a little extra money for some industry, and the Road Home program will finally get 70 million or something. All in the same bill, which is pretty unbelievable. So if you want to get money in New Orleans to rebuild your house, we also have to keep funding a war in Iraq. They're all tied together. I was amazed. A friend of mine who works in Congress, or he's a page, said that's normal. And I thought, that's scary. So there's no money to come home. And so nobody's coming home. Only very few. As I drove the streets, it was like 1 out of every 20 houses. I'd see broken house, doors, things falling apart, tilted sideways. And then suddenly there's a guy washing his car in his brand newly refurbished house. And he's just looking at his neighbors and, well, there are none. And I wave. And he waves because, at least I'm human. So, besides my own work, which I've done and I put out, not enough. I put up a few podcasts, a few videos. It's not enough. But there are people that do this full time. My favorite bloggers, full time, every day. And they talk about these issues. They write about what they see, but also what they learn doing their own research, as I mentioned before. And while I was there, one of the things I noticed was housing projects. In this picture back here, I don't know how good this looks to you. I don't know either if I would really love to live there, but these were public housing units in New Orleans. And I didn't go to this one, I went to another one. And you would see them, they were in perfect condition. By perfect, I mean they were clean, the windows and the doors and everything was in the right place. And then there was a big fence around them. I should have used that photo. With a big sign that said, closed? Anyway. And I asked someone, I said, what's going on here with these houses? Were they damaged? Because I don't see it. And someone said, oh, you don't know? They're being destroyed because of Katrina. And I said, oh, so they must have been flooded. They said, no water got here. And I said, so why are they destroying houses? Nobody lives there. No, people live there. They evacuated. When they come home, they weren't allowed back in. And I said, but that doesn't make any sense. Well, the city government sold the houses to, I don't want to accuse the Christians, a religious organization that has another plan for the property. And I thought, but that's public housing. The government isn't supposed to sell their people's houses if they're the poorest people too. You don't do that. I said, well, because of Katrina, they can. They said it was an emergency. It's a situation where one of the roof tiles flew off, so it got a little damaged. It's crazy, and it is sort of like, what? And I saw this over and over again. I saw 2 housing complexes and I heard about more, and I've been reading about even more. So again, somebody is benefiting. It's certainly not the people of the city. And, well, I'll move on. I talked about the insurance, that's over there. I do have a video about the experience of one of the video bloggers covered the housing thing where people came home and they couldn't get into their houses and they were giving speeches. I don't remember where I put it. It'll be in here somewhere. Here's one of the weirdest things that happened to me, and there were so many. I went to a legal clinic. The beauty is that this is just activists. People have moved from all over the United States, and the world for that matter, to New Orleans. People who had never been there before, much like myself. And they've quit whatever it is they do. Their job, for the most part, they've quit college. That's the biggest thing. Universities. They've just left. I talked to a lot of people. I said, are you a student? And they said, well, I was, but then this happened. So I'm just going to put that aside, and I'm going to work here for the next few years until things are better. There was a lot of that. And I went to one place that was a legal clinic, and it was just law students who had left school and moved to New Orleans. They rented a house, they got some funding, and in this place you can go and you can ask for information about what are my rights? Because some people can actually sue the people who built those ridiculous levees. Now, it's been said that you can't sue the Army Corps of Engineers, but they have figured out that you could sue them. And the point to doing that is, one, to actually get some acknowledgement of who did wrong, and two, to get some money to repair your house. So, of course, nobody can afford a lawyer, so these are free services. So I go there, and I did an interview, did a podcast with the lead legal person, the lawyer. She was very nice. And I'm not gonna, you can listen to that on your own. I come outside, and I sit down. I got wireless, so I'm excited. And I sit down to use the wireless. Very cute girl across from me. And, I'm trying to focus on social justice. And I think she started talking, I started talking to her. And she's got a stack of papers. And I wanted to, and I was like, oh, what's that? And she's like, oh, these. And she holds up a bunch of little classified ads. It looks like houses for sale. And she goes, this is my job. I have to go through all these. And I said, what is that? She goes, oh, these are houses that are being taken by the government, and this is how they announce it. And I said, houses, what? These are the houses of the people who got taken to other states, and they haven't touched the house, so it's considered abandoned. And I said, what? Still didn't make sense to me. Apparently, not apparently, it's fact, there was already a law in the state of Louisiana that said, in the case that a house is abandoned, okay, there's a lot of abandoned houses, right? It's hard to make a community with a lot of abandoned houses. It's a problem, so they have a law on the books, and now they're using it, that says, if your house is abandoned, obviously abandoned, you can see it, it's falling apart, the city government can come in, take it from you, from your name, and do what they want with it. They confiscate it. And I guess there was a practicality for this at some time, but it was before the storm, before the federal flood. Now what they do is, yes, if it looks abandoned, by law, they have to publish it 3 times in the newspaper. A little notice that reads, and the text was far too much, so I didn't paste it in. I do have a lot of these. Really long text, and it says your name, which is pretty embarrassing or odd. It says your name, located at your address. Your house is considered abandoned in big red writing under the law, la 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 la. If you do not do anything about it, like write to us, tell us where you are. Remember, most of them are somewhere else. Now, you could get this on the internet, but you really have to search. For the most part, it's the paper where people see this. But okay, you're not getting the newspaper. And it says, if you don't do anything about it, the city government is taking your property. And not only that, they have some way where they bill you for destroying the house, which is weird, because how do they have your address? And I said, so what do you do? And the girl says, I'm compiling a list, because we're keeping track of who's being completely, unfairly having their property taken. And she said, but there's not only that. Didn't you hear? If you don't mow your lawn, and if your shrubs look overgrown, that's also abandoned. And I said, no, that's just sloppy. And she goes, no, that's abandoned. And so I met an organization that one of the things they do is they go house to house and they mow the lawn and they trim the bushes of people who aren't there. I mean, that was actually a really positive thing, but it was a lot of work for them, not me. I should go back and really do the work. Maybe I will. And but the crazy part is, I think you guys are putting this together, but I'll explain anyway. Imagine you got moved because your house you can't live in it. And so you get pushed, you get that ticket to Houston. It's a few hours away, it takes a while. And you get a job and you have your house, and your old house is still all locked up. So you go and check on it. There are really people who hope one day to fix their house. So they go, and I see them, they were coming in every now and then. You check on the house, you lock the doors, you lock the windows, but you can't afford to do the work. So you go back to Houston, and it's a long trip. So you're not coming home all the time. You're not coming home to mow the lawn and trim the bushes. So a lot of these people, in fact, are at risk. Their houses are being taken while they're away, unless they read the newspaper and see these little notices. I had to mention that for housing, but it relates to prisons now. I said, wow. And she said, hey, you came in with a car, didn't you? I'm talking a lot, huh? 40. You came in with a car, didn't you? And I said, yeah, I rented a car. I'm Bicycle Mark, but I rented a car. And she goes, could you give me a ride somewhere? And it happened a lot. And I said, yeah, sure, wherever. And she goes, I have to go to the prison. And I said, oh, why do you have to go to the prison? She said, don't you know? There's a lot of that. She said, don't you know? We go every 3 days a week at so-and-so o'clock. We go to the door of the prison and we meet the prisoners as the people as they're released. And they said, why do you do that? And she said, well, because we're taking a survey. Don't you know? The prison, and I went to see it. This is a photo of the Orleans parish prison. Didn't look like that. Different one. The city lockup was flooded. It's a really tall skyscraper. This is where photos would come in handy. It's a really tall skyscraper, and the first 2 to 3 floors were basically flooded out. It's actually been documented on a few media channels, alternatives such as Democracy Now!, that prisoners during Katrina suffered unbelievable pains. And of course, people say, well, they're prisoners, but you know, you could be in there for, I don't know, smoking weed. Yeah. And prisoners had to endure, you know, being flooded. I mean, they were, you know, water level rising as they're in the cell, and then later they were taken out and put on the highway. This story has gotten some attention, you know, held at gunpoint on the highway, and you're just standing there waiting for the, I don't know, the rescue to come. And, I mean, there's some discussion of, you know, who was shot or... Anyway, the girl says, I'm going to the prison. We survey everybody. As they come out of the prison, we ask them questions. I said, well, what do you ask them? Well, they're in a temporary prison, and it wasn't really, it doesn't have the facilities for this many people, typical American story, but even worse in New Orleans. And it also was damaged in the storm. So there is probably, first of all, we can't get in. They don't let any visitors see the inside of the prison. We have to wait outside. Because the old prison had a proper system, this new one doesn't have it, so you don't have to go inside. You're not allowed. They don't want you to know what's going on inside. But as people come out, so you could be arrested on being drunk, which happens in New Orleans. You could be arrested on being drunk the night before, picked up, and in theory, you should be released the next day. But as is the case in the United States these days, you can be held longer because it's an emergency situation, because there was a hurricane, therefore all of our laws go kind of out the window. So people are being held longer, and there are cases of people being picked up for drunken disorderly and held for, I don't know, weeks or more. The thing is, if that's not bad enough, they're coming out sick. They're coming out with respiratory diseases. They're coming out, they're going in just drunk, they're coming out extremely sick. And so they're also getting beaten. We don't know about that. They're getting packed into all in the same cell, excessive amounts of people. And one of the popular things on the survey, I saw them, was that the toilets don't work. So there's just shit everywhere. And that's how they live. So these legal people, it was their task to go and interview and ask, how are you treated? Did you see black mold on the wall? Because that is dangerous for the respiratory system. And I couldn't believe it. So I went to the prison. I went to the outside of the prison, and sure enough, people were coming out. They were interviewing them. The place looked like Guantanamo. And I can say that because we've seen enough photos of Guantanamo. The part that I drove around, I saw very scary. This is one of these issues that the media doesn't care enough about. And why? Well, because prisoners, they're not very big in the news audience, not big enough for them to be so concerned about them, because it's an uncomfortable topic. Maybe some people were murderers, and there's a very big spirit that says, well, if a person's in prison, they're probably bad anyway. But of course, as we know, the great quote by Dostoevsky, which it's not because he said it that it's true, but it's true. The degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons, and if that's so, then American society is fucked. I don't know. Yeah, it's one of those things, do you clap? One of the minor details, and I'm running out of time, was, and you guys will like this, in the storm, and bloggers were very good about telling this, because they work there. The guy who works in the municipal building blogs at night, and he said, by the way, a lot of our records for, what did he say? Mortgages, prison records, they're kept in the basement. Yeah, the servers too. And when the water level rose, these things were lost. Now, all of you very smart people will say, well, it's network, so somewhere else the files are kept. True, but evidence, you know, the fingerprinting, well, maybe they have that, but the evidence baggies with your case, maybe you're in jail, but you're awaiting trial, they lost most, if not all, of that. And so there's a big crisis going on because there are prisoners running around, the evidence has been lost, and they're in jail, and in some cases, they don't know how many more years they have to serve out. There have been stories coming out about prisoners who have been lost in the system. Evidence that has been lost, your case, your details. And bloggers, Gulf Sales is one of them, but he's not the only, have talked a lot about what they've seen, what they've noticed, and asked questions. I mean, this is what they do well, and I've learned a lot with them. Dismantling education, it goes along with everything else I've just said. They are using the fact that Katrina is going on, and bloggers are on the forefront of this because there's a lot of teachers blogging, former teachers, because most of them were fired. All the ones part of the union were fired. They're creating charter schools, and a charter school is a very complex thing, but it is, in essence, run like a business. And they decided, with money from Laura Bush, the Laura Bush Foundation was a big contributor, they decided to start charter schools in New Orleans to replace the public schools. And they've made these decisions while most people are not home. And there's no federal money for education. That was something I talked a lot about with people. Some people really liked the new cool schools they were building. The problem was, this was for the wealthy people. They were in neighborhoods that were not damaged. I can't go much into education, I'm running out of time. Pumps was a popular issue when I met certain bloggers. New Orleans gets flooded, or can get flooded, relatively on a normal amount. It happens. So they have a system of pumps, much like in the Netherlands, I guess we have. I live in the Netherlands. And the funny thing is, they had these old pumps, and they got really damaged in Katrina, so they ordered new ones. There was some money for that. And then coincidentally, they ordered it from a company that's a friend of Jeb Bush, Moving Water Industries. And as it turns out, they spent a couple million, I don't have the number with me, but they spent many millions on these pumps, and they don't fit. They don't fit. So why did they give the contract to this particular pump company? I don't know. But this is one of those issues that, there's a blogger that has dedicated his whole blog to it's called Fix the Pumps, and I think now he's actually gotten work as a journalist, which is an interesting side effect of doing this kind of work. You start off as your own person and you're independent. Sometimes if people like what you do, you may get hired out. That's happened. I'm going to skip past the video blogs. I should just make a note to everyone that there are people doing video on these issues. The housing situation, there's a lot going out. And there's also that very famous South African engineer who's been running around talking about how they knew that this was going to happen. And he shows you in his videos, he shows you the graphs and the charts. And he has taken it upon himself to go directly to the internet user. Instead of, he lectures too, but he's doing it directly via his own video blog. And that's levies.org, which has become a cause more than a video blog, but still, in essence, it's a video blog. There's levies.org. I'm going to move past it. My more or less final thought is what's amazing, everything I've just talked about, I've talked about my own stories, but these issues are being written about by people. You could learn about this without going there, although it is interesting to go. And in many ways, a movement has been born in New Orleans, and that is the movement of the bloggers. From the people who get together and rebuild houses together for friends or for strangers. But they also have become a force that the newspapers pay attention to, that the mayor has to respond to. They're powerful. They're getting powerful as people start to recognize them. The trick and the question is, are people going to be concerned about, to want to read, to want to know? There's this weird thing in this world that we live in where we could know and have the information about people who are being oppressed, about people who are even being killed or suffering, and the weird part is we can kind of act like we don't know, or we can choose not to look. And that's the big question with these types of blogs in general. The information is out there, it's a lot. The question is, do people want to know, or would they prefer to imagine that this isn't happening? You'd much prefer to think New Orleans is being rebuilt, and it was a storm that damaged the city. It wasn't the federal government. So a movement has been born. They have this fantastic conference. I say fantastic in small letters. It's very modest. And that's at the end of the month. It's called Rising Tide. And they bring the bloggers, of course, with all their different backgrounds, but they also bring activists. And they get together and they talk about strategies for what they really would like, more people to know what's going on in New Orleans and what's happening now. Not the storm a year or two ago, but what's happening now. So that's Rising Tide. I've said most of my conclusions, so I'll probably leave it at that. Oh, I did want to mention this, and this is kind of far-fetched, but I like being far-fetched. That's why I'm at this conference. It's one of these things, this may become a new method of gentrification. Imagine there are governments somewhere that, or perhaps businesses even, large-scale contractors, who are paying attention to what's happened in Katrina and kind of going, this is a way to make a lot of money. By the way, all that land that they acquire, the city, they could do things with it. It's very close to the sea, and that area has a lot of oil exploration, but the houses were already there before the oil was discovered and the gas. So if they confiscate all these houses, I'm not saying I know they're doing this, but they could sell it to perhaps an oil company that wants to build a refinery, because that's prime real estate. It's just that these damn people have been living there. And worst of all, they're poor people. Man, we hate that because we don't make any money off of that. Now, this is just, I'm just being facetious. Am I being facetious? That's a big word. But this is the question, is this something that a lot of, in other disasters, following other disasters, that they'll repeat? And actually, Iraq starts to look a lot like it in terms of, yes, it's a disaster for people, but it's a big success for certain businesses. And I start to wonder, could that happen in Europe? It hasn't, to my recollection in the last few years, it hasn't happened. But I bring it up just because I think we should always be aware that it's possible. I'll stop there. I guess we could take some questions, right? But remember, I'm not an expert. I'm just a guy telling a story. I don't know. Yeah, I don't see. Well, you could also just ask me and see me. I don't know if there's enough time. Can I show the videos? I don't know how. The other thing is, what if they're boring? You're going to be disappointed. They're not exciting. I mean, this is not always exciting. That's one of the problems. But this is just a clip, not the full video.
In the city of New Orleans and the country for real. Now look, this is what we're looking at today. As you know, I like to make 2 quotes to get this started. When I was in Baton Rouge, Representative Congressman Richard Baker was quoted in the Baton Rouge Advocate by a New Yorker reporter as saying we could not get rid of public housing in New Orleans, so God did it for us. Now, Alphonse Jackson, the head man at HUD, said New Orleans will never be a majority black city again because black people are poor and they don't have any reason to come back. Of course, if we don't have any housing, we can't come back. We have politicians who want to use us as a beating back for everybody else. They want you not to come back unless you get a job, but without a house, you can't get a job. So that's basically saying we don't want y'all back. Oliver Thomas said if you're not willing to work, don't come back.
I think I stopped it here. Or I can. I realize, and it's one of the good things that I didn't play the video earlier, but now I did. It's a hard accent to understand. I thought about that as I did this. No? Oh, you guys are so good. Okay. But he's talking about what I was talking about, the whole pyramid of if you want to come home, then how can you come home if you don't have these following things going on? And if you stop these things from going on, how can I ever come home? The other vlog was the very, he's not exciting, the levees.org guy. Now he uses graphs. It's like the Weather Channel. Graphics.
Most severe meteorological conditions considered recently characteristic for that region.
So he does this in person, but he also puts it out as a video blog. I mean, some of you might be used to video blogs where a guy is going like this. I know I do it a lot. But this is their style, and I present it as a video blog because in the end that's what it is for me. There's not enough audio and video. There's more text, but that's a whole other discussion. And perhaps, for the most part, text is still king in a lot of issues and media. So those are the only 2 videos I brought, and maybe next time I'll have a lot more info and experiences to tell about. I do want to go back. I've told you all these sort of, maybe it was a little like I had fun, but it was a really shocking experience and sad. But in the end, it was strangely addicting because everybody wanted to tell me their story. And so it became just constant exciting. Kind of like here, someone's always doing something. In New Orleans, somebody was always grabbing me and saying, "You journalist," they didn't even care who I worked for, which is great because I don't work for anyone. And they said, "Yeah, let me show you this." And they would show me something, a house, a project. People were starving to be heard, and that in itself was very telling. I'm done.